I never imagined the people planning Grandma's funeral were also planning her house sale. You grow up thinking family means love, that no matter what happens, your parents will protect what matters most. But I learned the truth after my grandmother died. Love can be conditional, and trust can be sold. My name is Alice, and this is how my parents tried to sell my grandmother's home behind my back, not realizing she'd already made sure I'd never lose it. I grew up in a family where silence was safer than honesty. My father, Daniel, was an accountant. Neat, controlled, always calculating. My mother, Elaine, was the kind of woman who smiled with her teeth, but never with her eyes. We looked perfect from the outside. Nice house, good schools, matching Christmas photos. But inside those walls, everything was measured. How you spoke, how you dressed, how much emotion you were allowed to show. The only place I ever felt like myself was Grandma's house, a yellow 2-story home on the corner of Maple and Ivy, where time moved slower and love didn't have conditions. She called it our sanctuary. The first time I stepped inside, I remember the smell of lavender and old books. There were soft floral curtains, shelves lined with porcelain teacups, and that creaky wooden floor that sang when you walked across it. It wasn't just a house, it was a feeling. Every Friday after school, I'd walk over to her place, drop my backpack by the door, and head straight to the kitchen. She'd already have water boiling. We had our ritual: chamomile tea, honey toast, and the same 2 chairs facing the garden. She'd hum while pouring my cup and ask about my week. When I told her my parents thought art school was a waste of time, she didn't scold me for arguing. She just said, "Dreams don't have to make sense to anyone but you." It was the only place I could breathe. Grandma Rose was quiet, but unshakable. She'd lived through years of hardship, raising my mother alone after my grandfather left, working 2 jobs and saving every penny for that yellow house. She never remarried. She said the house was her partner, stubborn, old, but loyal. When I was 10, she let me plant my own rosebush out front. She told me, "As long as this grows, you'll always have a place here." That rosebush is still there, or at least it was. My parents, meanwhile, treated Grandma like an obligation. Mom would call once a week, always ending with, "Well, I've done my part." Dad mostly stayed out of it unless money was involved. He'd make comments like, "The property's in a great location. When she's gone, at least something good will come of it." I'd roll my eyes, thinking it was tasteless humor, but Grandma would just smile faintly and change the subject. Now I realize she already knew what they were capable of. In her last year, I became her caretaker. She didn't ask me to. I just couldn't imagine anyone else doing it right. I'd drive her to the doctor, pick up prescriptions, cook her meals. At night, we'd sit by the window, listening to the crickets. Sometimes she'd talk about the past, about how my mom used to play piano before she became too practical. Other times, she'd just hold my hand and say, "Promise me you'll take care of this place when I'm gone." I always promised, and she'd smile, a little sad, as if she already knew it wouldn't be that simple. When her health began to fail, my parents suddenly got very involved. They started showing up unannounced, not with groceries or help, but with questions. What's her will say? Who's her lawyer? Do you know where she keeps the documents? I'd tell them it wasn't their business, but they'd insist. Mom would say, "We're just trying to prepare, honey. These things are complicated." And Grandma, sitting quietly in her armchair, would just watch them. One afternoon after they left, she said softly, "Don't trust everything they tell you." "About what?" I asked. She shook her head. "You'll see." The night before she died, she woke up calling my name. Her hand was cold when I took it. She whispered, "The papers are in the study. Second drawer. You'll know what they mean when the time comes." I thought she was confused. I told her to rest. She smiled weakly and said, "It's already taken care of, sweetheart. Don't let them sell it." Those were her last words to me. After she passed, I felt hollow. The funeral was beautiful in the way my parents liked things. Expensive, organized, emotionless. My mother cried just enough for people to notice. My father handled the logistics like a business transaction. I barely remembered the service. I just remembered the silence afterward. Everyone left. The flowers wilted, and I stayed behind. I traced the edge of the casket and whispered, "I'll keep your promise, Grandma." From behind me, Dad said sharply, "Alice, enough. The lawyer is handling everything. Let's go." That was his way of grieving, through control. The following weeks were a blur. I went back to work. My parents were oddly cheerful. They started talking about new opportunities and investments. One night, Mom mentioned they were taking a short trip to the coast. When I asked how they could afford it, she just smiled. "Oh, don't worry about money, honey. Things are finally working out." Something in her tone made me uneasy. The next few days, she called again. "Good news," she said. "Everything's settled. You don't need to worry about a thing." "Settled?" I repeated. "What do you mean?" "Oh, just estate paperwork, boring stuff. Your father handled it." Then, almost as an afterthought, "The inspection went smoothly, by the way." "The inspection? For what?" There was a pause. Then a fake laugh. "Oh, nothing. You wouldn't understand. Anyway, how's work?" And before I could answer, she hung up. That word, inspection, wouldn't leave my mind. It circled around my thoughts every night as I lay awake replaying her tone. A week later, I decided to visit Grandma's house. I hadn't been there since the funeral. I just needed to feel close to her again. When I turned onto Maple and Ivy, I didn't recognize it at first. The yard was stripped bare. The flower beds, gone. The old porch swing she used to sit on, replaced with something new and modern. And right there, staked in the front lawn, was a giant red "for sale" sign. I remember slamming on the brakes. My hands shook on the steering wheel. For a moment, I thought it might be some kind of mistake, maybe the wrong house. But then I saw the ivy pattern on the porch railing, the same one I helped her repaint last summer. It was hers. Ours. And strangers were about to buy it because my parents decided money meant more than memories. But what they didn't know, what Grandma made sure of, is that not every secret dies with the person who kept it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the "for sale" sign. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the audacity. They'd stood in the same room where Grandma and I drank tea, smiled, and sold it like it meant nothing. I kept replaying her final words, "Don't let them sell it." I didn't understand how she could have known this would happen, but now I felt it. That quiet warning was the thread I needed to pull. So I went back to the house. It was after midnight, the street was silent, the "for sale" sign swaying in the wind. I parked a block away, slipped through the side gate, and used the spare key Grandma kept under the old clay pot, the one no one else knew about. The door opened with a soft click. The air inside was stale, dust heavy on the furniture. They'd cleared most of her things already. Boxes stacked against the wall, labels written in my mother's neat handwriting. Donate, sell, trash. The word trash on Grandma's belongings made my stomach twist. I wandered through the house like a ghost. Every step echoed memories. Laughter, music, late-night stories. I ended up in the study, drawn by something I couldn't explain. The drawers were mostly empty. But then in the bottom one, I saw it. A thick, yellowed envelope marked in Grandma's handwriting. For Alice. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were 2 documents, a letter and a folded legal form with a notary stamp. The letter came first. My dearest Alice, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to protect what I love most. I know your mother and father better than they think. They see this house as money, not memories. That's why, years ago, I made sure the deed would include your name. Half of this house is yours, legally and irrevocably. I did this because I trust your heart, not their intentions. Keep this safe. If they try to sell what isn't theirs, remind them who they're dealing with. With all my love, Grandma Rose. My eyes blurred with tears. She knew. She'd planned for this. I unfolded the second paper, the property deed. There it was in black ink. Rosemary L. Green and Alice M. Green, co-owners. Half of the house belonged to me, legally. The fury that hit me wasn't loud or explosive. It was cold, focused. They'd tried to erase me from something that wasn't even theirs to erase. The next morning, I didn't call them. I didn't tell them what I found. Instead, I went to work like normal, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was strategizing. I spent my lunch break at the county recorder's office. The clerk, a woman named Pam, looked up when I slid the deed across the counter. "Can you check if this is still active?" I asked. She typed for a few minutes, humming softly. Then her eyebrows lifted. "Well, look at that. Yes, you're still listed as a co-owner. There's been no transfer without your consent, which means they can't legally sell it." I finished for her. She smiled. "Not without your signature, sweetheart. Whoever's trying is in for a rude awakening." Relief flooded through me, but it was mixed with something sharper. Power. I thanked her and left, heart pounding. For the first time since Grandma died, I felt in control again. That evening, Mom called. Her tone was too bright. "Sweetheart, guess what? The house sold today. We got a fantastic offer, over asking. Isn't that wonderful?" I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. "Wow, that's fast." "I know," she chirped. "It's a blessing, really. The buyers are transferring funds tomorrow." I almost laughed. Tomorrow? Not anymore. Instead, I said sweetly, "You must be so relieved. Grandma would be proud of how efficient you are." There was a pause. Then, suspiciously, "Why do you say it like that?" "Oh, no reason," I said, "just thinking how smart you both are." I hung up before she could ask more. Let them think I was oblivious. I wanted to see how far they'd go. The next morning, I contacted a real estate lawyer, a woman named Jenna. I sent her copies of the documents. When she called back, her voice was half amused, half impressed. "Your parents really tried to sell the property without your consent?" "I didn't even tell me it was listed." "Unbelievable," she muttered. "Don't worry, I've handled worse. The sale can't go through without your signature, and if they've signed your name, that's fraud." The word fraud hit me like a thunderclap, because now this wasn't just betrayal, it was criminal. Jenna continued, "We'll file a temporary injunction to freeze the transaction. I'll need you to sign an affidavit confirming your ownership. That'll stop the sale cold." "Do it," I said without hesitation. By noon, the papers were filed, and by evening, the realtor's office called me. "Hi, Alice. This is Megan from Greenfield Realty. There seems to be some confusion. We received notice that the property is under dispute." "Confusion?" I said, feigning innocence. "Oh, no, there's no confusion. My parents forgot to mention I co-own the house. Simple mistake." She sighed for a beat. "Oh, well, the buyers are going to be very disappointed." "I'm sure they are. And then Before hanging up, I added softly, "But maybe next time they'll verify who's actually allowed to sell." By the end of the week, everything unraveled. The sale was frozen, the buyers pulled out, and my parents were furious. Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced, face flushed and eyes blazing. She didn't even say hello. "How dare you interfere with something you don't understand?" she snapped. I stayed calm. "It's my property, too. It was your grandmother's property. And she made sure I inherited half. Maybe because she didn't trust you?" She paled. "That's ridiculous. You're making things up." I pulled the deed from my bag and laid it on the table. Her eyes darted to the paper, then back to me. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For once, she was speechless. Finally, she hissed, "You've ruined everything." "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. A few hours later, Dad called. His voice was calm, too calm. "Listen, Alice, this has gotten out of hand. You need to retract that injunction. You're causing problems you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You tried to sell property that wasn't yours. That's illegal." He sighed like I was being dramatic again. "Your mother and I needed that money. We've been struggling. You have no idea the kind of pressure we're under." "Then maybe you should have asked me instead of stealing from me." There was a long silence. Then he said low and cold, "You've made an enemy out of your own family. Remember that." And he hung up. That night, I sat in the quiet of my apartment staring at Grandma's letter again. Her handwriting was steady, graceful. She knew exactly what she was protecting me from. I whispered, "You were right, Grandma. You always were." But something inside me wasn't satisfied. I didn't just want the sale stopped, I wanted them to feel what they'd done. They'd built their lives around appearances. So I decided to take away the one thing they valued more than money, their reputation. I started collecting everything, every text, every voicemail, every email about the sale. They'd both been careless, assuming I'd never find out. There was messages between Mom and the realtor talking about finalizing signatures, and one that said, "Don't mention Alice until after closing." That was gold. I compiled it all into a neat little file. Then I made an appointment with their bank's fraud department. When I walked in, the manager greeted me politely. "How can we help you today?" "I'd like to report an attempted real estate fraud," I said calmly, sliding the folder across the desk. By the time I left, they'd promised an internal review. If my parents had signed anything under my name, there would be consequences. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Then late one night, I got a call. It was Jenna, my lawyer. "You'll never guess what happened. The bank froze your parents' escrow account. Apparently, some irregularities came up in the signature verification." I couldn't help it. I laughed. It wasn't joy. It was relief, justice, everything Grandma had deserved. Jenna laughed too. "I've seen messy family disputes, but yours? This might set a record." Let's just say I underestimated the wrong granddaughter. A week later, my parents requested a family meeting. They asked to meet at a coffee shop, public enough so they could pretend we were civilized. When I arrived, they were already sitting together, their perfect smiles plastered on like masks. Dad spoke first. "We just want to make peace, Alice. This has gotten out of control." Mom nodded quickly. "Yes, we can all move on if you just sign over your half. We'll even..." When I woke up the next morning, sunlight spilled through Grandma's lace curtains. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel trapped in a nightmare. I felt steady. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that used to frighten me when I was a kid. But now, it felt like an ally. It was proof that I had protected what she left behind. Still, the calm couldn't last, because I knew my parents. They never accepted defeat quietly. And sure enough, by that afternoon, my phone lit up with messages, dozens of them. Some were from Mom, alternating between guilt and rage. Others were from extended relatives, forwarding gossip and half-truths. Apparently, my parents had already started spinning a story. Alice betrayed her own family. She's making false accusations. She's trying to take everything for herself. Classic. They couldn't win legally, so they'd go for sympathy. At first, I ignored it, but the lies kept spreading. Family friends who'd once cooed at me during Christmas now sent cautious texts. "Is everything okay? Your parents said you're suing them." I realized I couldn't stay quiet anymore. That night, I sat at Grandma's old desk with a cup of tea. I opened my laptop and began typing. The words came easily, like Grandma herself was guiding my hands. "My name is Alice Green. After my grandmother passed away, my parents sold her house, without telling me. What they didn't know was that she had made me co-owner years ago. When I discovered the sale, I froze the transaction. Now they're calling me greedy. But all I did was protect what was rightfully mine and hers. No drama, no insults, just the truth." I posted it on Facebook, where most of our family and community still lingered. Then I turned off my phone. By morning, it had hundreds of comments. People I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me privately. I always wondered about them. Others shared their own stories. Parents who'd gambled away inheritances, siblings who'd betrayed trust. For every lie my parents told, 10 people were now reading the truth. By the end of the week, the story had spilled beyond our small circle. Someone reposted it on a local community page. Then a small online publication contacted me for permission to feature it anonymously. I agreed. It wasn't about humiliating them. It was about protecting Grandma's name, because the house had been hers, and the values she taught me were being dragged through the mud. When the article went live, it used the headline, "Local Woman Stops Parents' Secret Sale of Family Home." Clean, neutral, but powerful. Within hours, the comments flooded in. Most people sided with me. A few doubted, of course, there always are, but the tide was clear. Mom called again that night. I let it ring, then answered on the final tone. Her voice was trembling with fury. "How could you? Do you have any idea what you've done? Everyone's talking about us." "About what you did," I corrected. She gasped, like the truth itself had slapped her. "You've ruined our reputation." I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped pretending. There was a sharp inhale on the other end, then a quiet threat. "You think you've won, but you'll regret this. We'll fight you legally if we have to." I almost pitied her. "Mom, you can't. You'd lose. You know that." She hung up. For a few days, the silence was heavier than ever. Then Dad showed up. Not at my apartment this time, at the house. I heard his car before I saw him, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. He stood there in the same pressed shirt he always wore to meetings, trying to look in control. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. He glanced past me into the hallway. "So this was all this was about? A house." "It's not a house," I said quietly. "It's her." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You've turned this into a spectacle. Your mother hasn't eaten in days. Maybe guilt isn't as easy to digest as money." He stared at me. Disappointed, maybe, or just realizing I'd grown teeth. "I don't want to keep fighting," he said. "Let's find a compromise. Sell it together, split the money." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. Do you hear yourself? You still don't get it. It's not for sale. Not ever. He lowered his voice like a businessman trying to seal a deal. You could have a new life with that money, Alice. Why cling to the past? Because the past is the only honest thing we have left. For a moment, he looked tired. Not angry, not manipulative, just old. And in that moment, I saw it. The man Grandma once trusted, hollowed out by greed and regret. He turned away. This isn't over, he muttered, walking to his car, but in my heart, I knew it already was. Over the next month, the fallout unfolded slowly, like watching a storm move across the horizon. Their social circle fractured. Friends stopped inviting them to dinners. Charity committees quietly reconsidered their participation. The green name, the one they'd spent years polishing, was now whispered with pity. And still, I didn't gloat. I didn't post again. I let silence do what justice couldn't. I spent my evenings cleaning the house, not just tidying, but restoring. I repainted the faded shutters Grandma had loved in soft sky blue. I replanted her roses, thorns and all. Every little act was a piece of her brought back to life. One afternoon, while sweeping the porch, a neighbor stopped by. Mrs. Collins, she'd known Grandma for 50 years. Your grandmother would be proud, she said softly. She used to tell me, that girl has more backbone than the whole family combined. She was right. I smiled through a lump in my throat. She gave me everything I needed to survive them. Mrs. Collins nodded, eyes misty. Not just survive, dear, thrive. But peace is never simple, is it? A few weeks later, I received a letter from a law firm, my parents' attorneys. They were contesting the deed, claiming Grandma wasn't of sound mind when she added me as co-owner. I laughed bitterly. Of course, when manipulation failed, they'd turn to slander. I called Jenna immediately. She chuckled darkly. Desperate move. But don't worry, we'll crush it. We've got notarized signatures, witness statements, and property records. Still, the thought of dragging Grandma's name through court made my stomach twist. She didn't deserve that. So, I decided to end it before it began. The next Sunday, I drove to my parents' house. I hadn't been there since the confrontation at the cafe. Mom opened the door, surprise flickering in her eyes. Dad stood behind her, guarded. I'm not here to fight, I said, just to talk. They hesitated, but let me in. The house felt smaller than I remembered. The walls were bare, the air was heavy. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where we'd once shared birthdays, now littered with unopened mail and tension. I got your lawyer's letter, I said quietly. Dad crossed his arms. We're only protecting ourselves. By attacking a dead woman's memory? He looked away. Mom's voice cracked. We thought she loved us too. She did. She just didn't trust you. The silence that followed was the longest I'd ever known. Finally, I pushed a folder toward them. Inside were photocopies of everything, the deed, the bank investigation, the emails. This is everything. If you keep fighting, this all goes public officially. Newspapers, court transcripts, everything. Mom's lip trembled. You'd really do that? I've already done it, I said softly. It's just a matter of where the story goes next. She covered her face. Dad looked defeated. The arrogance drained out of him like air from a balloon. I stood to leave. At the doorway, I paused. For what it's worth, I never wanted revenge.
I wanted honesty. You chose the rest. And I walked out. When I got back to Grandma's house, it was twilight. The sun melted into the horizon, painting the sky in pink and gold. I sat on the porch steps, breathing in the quiet. The roses swayed gently in the wind. Their scent wrapped.
I thought silence would feel peaceful once the truth was out. But silence, after a storm, feels heavier than thunder. For weeks after everything unraveled, the house sat in that strange quiet, half emptied by movers, half haunted by memories. I'd wander from room to room, brushing my hand along the walls, wondering if Grandma could somehow see all of this, if she'd be proud of what I'd done, or heartbroken that it had come to this. The papers were signed now. The court had recognized the fraudulent sale attempt. The buyers had backed out the second they realized they were about to buy into a lawsuit. My parents' reputation, once polished and perfect, had crumbled overnight. Neighbors whispered, extended families stopped calling. The world that once revolved around their social appearances now revolved around one thing: shame. And me? I had the house back, but it didn't feel like a victory. I'd tried to fill the silence by fixing things, repainting the chipped corners, replacing old curtains, even dusting the photo frames Grandma had left behind. But every creak of the floorboards carried an echo of her laugh, and every flicker of afternoon light felt like her hand brushing my shoulder. Grief and justice make strange companions. You don't know which one to hold on to. I was sitting by the window one evening, sorting through old boxes, when I heard the crunch of tires outside. My heart sank before I even looked. They'd come. I watched from behind the curtain as my parents stepped out of their car. Mom looked thinner, her hair unbrushed, eyes hollow. Dad, still clinging to that forced composure, wore a suit even though it was almost sunset. For a moment, I thought about not answering, but I knew they'd just keep coming back. So I opened the door. We stood in the doorway for a few seconds, just staring at each other. No words, no warmth, just years of unspoken things hanging in the air. Mom broke first. "You won, Alice. Congratulations." Her voice cracked around the edges. "Are you happy now?" I didn't answer. Dad stepped forward. "You've humiliated us, dragged our name through mud. For what? Money?" The word hit me like a slap. Money. That's all they could see, even now. "This isn't about money," I said quietly. "It's about what's right." He laughed, bitter, broken. "Right? You think what you did was right? Taking us to court? Leaking our names to the press?" "I didn't leak anything," I said, my voice rising. "The truth did that, on its own." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We were just trying to keep the family together. We needed that money to fix what was falling apart. You wouldn't understand because you never let me in." I cut in. "You lied to me. You used Grandma's death as an opportunity. You sold her home like it was a stock to cash out. And you didn't even think I'd find out." Her face hardened. "We thought you'd thank us. You didn't want the burden of this place." I took a slow breath. "This house isn't a burden. It's her legacy. And you treated it like a transaction." The words hung there, heavy and final. Dad's mask slipped. "Do you really think this ends well for you? You've turned your back on your family, Alice. Don't come crying to us when you're alone." It was the kind of threat that used to terrify me, but not anymore. I've been alone for a long time, and I'm still here. He stepped forward like he wanted to say more, but I closed the door before he could. The knock came once, hard, then silence. I stood there, my back to the door, shaking, not from fear, but from release. They didn't come back after that.
Days turned into weeks. The world slowly returned to normal, or at least something like it. The lawyers wrapped up the remaining paperwork. My parents were ordered to repay the escrow funds they'd withdrawn. Their accounts were frozen for a while, their credit wrecked. It wasn't vengeance, it was accountability. But the truth is, winning doesn't feel like you imagine it will. Justice doesn't erase grief. And sometimes the people you expose are still your parents. One night, I walked into Grandma's old study. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust, her scent still lingering in the wood. On her desk sat the small lamp she used every night when reading. The bulb was dim now, but I turned it on anyway. That's when I saw the envelope. It had been tucked behind a stack of old recipe cards, brittle and yellow with age. My name was written across the front in her careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a short letter, written months before she passed. My dearest Alice, if you're reading this, I'm no longer there to tell you in person, but know this. I see the goodness in you, the strength, the courage to do what's right even when it hurts. I added your name to the deed because I trust you to protect what I've built, not the walls, but the love that lived here. Whatever happens, don't let bitterness take root where love once grew. Remember, sometimes justice looks like peace. I read those words again and again until they blurred. For the first time in months, I cried. Not out of anger, not out of exhaustion, but out of release. The next morning, I went out to the backyard. The garden was overgrown, weeds curling between the cracks, the roses drooping. Grandma used to say, you can tell the soul of a house by its garden. So I spent the day clearing it, pulling weeds, turning soil, planting new bulbs. By sunset, my hands were raw and my back ached, but the earth looked alive again. I placed the letter in a small glass jar and buried it beneath the rose bush she had planted decades ago. As I stood there, covered in dirt, I felt something shift inside me. Not joy, not triumph, but peace. The kind Grandma always carried, even when the world disappointed her. A few months later, I heard through distant relatives that my parents had moved out of town, sold their car, downsized their home. They stopped showing up to family gatherings. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew why. Part of me wished things had been different, that they'd chosen honesty, that we could have grieved together instead of tearing each other apart. But part of me also knew some people mistake love for control, and when you stop letting them control you, they call it betrayal. I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset over the same horizon Grandma used to admire every night. The air smelled of new roses and fresh paint. The house, her house, glowed in the fading light. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was living in her shadow. I was continuing her story. I whispered into the quiet, I kept my promise, Grandma. Then I smiled, soft, tired, but real. Because in the end, revenge wasn't about making them suffer. It was about reclaiming what they thought they could take from me, my peace, my voice, my worth. And I wasn't letting anyone sell that ever again.